Somewhere between the shadows of the past and the light of the present lies a question few dare to ask. What has humanity forgotten about Africa? Who erased the secrets of its sacred kingdoms? And why do so many traces point to a truth that never made it into books? When we look at Axum, this African empire that interacted with biblical kings, guarded a sacred artifact, and shaped cultures long before the West erected its cathedrals, we realize that there is something greater behind the silence. There is a spiritual revelation that spans centuries, hidden among obelisks, ancestral chants, and manuscripts that breathe wisdom. In this narrative, you will hear what time has tried to conceal: the forbidden connection between Axum, the lineage of Sheba and Solomon, and the mysteries that shaped the sacred history of humanity. A connection so profound that it transforms how we understand faith, identity, politics, and the very meaning of ancestry. And before we embark on this path of ancient mysteries, leave a ritual gesture in this digital temple, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this ancestral revelation. Your presence here honors the echoes of those who came before. The morning mist still lingered over the hills of Axum when the ancient question began to echo, like a whisper that crosses centuries. Why was such a powerful kingdom silenced? It was said that, in the first light of day, it was possible to hear the wind carrying stories that never made it into books, stories that spoke of sacred kings, invisible pacts, and secrets guarded with iron and spirit. Whoever walked among those stones felt a presence, something that observed, that remembered, that insisted on not being erased. And it was in this ancestral silence that the forbidden doubt took shape, ready to awaken whoever dared to listen. It was said that certain scribes, when recording the deeds of ancient peoples, would avert their gaze whenever the name of Axum appeared among the scrolls. It was as if a shadow hung over that empire, a mystery that no one wanted to face. The question seeped in like water on dry soil. What exactly was there that so many tried to hide? The stories spoke of a spiritual heritage that transcended borders, of symbols inscribed in stone that disturbed those who loved to control narratives. With each new hidden account, the flame of curiosity grew even stronger. And as the legend progressed, it was said that a foreign traveler once entered the heart of Axum and felt the weight of something greater than any kingdom. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. The inscriptions on the walls, the obelisks that touched the sky, and the aroma of burning resins in the temples seemed to converse with each other, weaving a truth too ancient to be undone. There, in that instant, he understood that the mystery was not absence. It was an overwhelming presence. A presence that disturbed the world that would come after. The ancient priests murmured that such luminous secrets needed to be protected, for they could blind those who were not ready. Thus, little by little, the forbidden question became its own guardian, passing from mouth to mouth, from heart to heart, surviving time like an ember hidden under thick ashes. Each generation repeated it carefully, fearing it might be too powerful for some, but too necessary to be forgotten. And so, as the sun rose over the obelisks, the question remained there, breathing among the stones, summoning whoever dared to listen. For it did not seek an immediate answer, it sought awakening. And in the wake of this awakening, another mystery approached, ready to reveal the sacred ground where Axum erected its throne between worlds. When the ancient routes of the Horn of Africa opened at dawn, Axum emerged like a sanctuary nestled among mountains that seemed to guard secrets from the beginning of time. The air carried the scent of warm earth and resin, while deep valleys etched the landscape like scars from forgotten eras. Those who observed this territory noticed that nothing there was random. Each feature seemed placed by invisible hands, preparing the stage for a civilization that would converse with oceans and stars. The elders said that the mountains around Axum were more than just stones, they were silent watchtowers. Among their shadows, hunters heard echoes that didn't belong to the present, as if ancient voices still echoed through the cliffs. It was common for travelers to stop, a shiver running down their spines, feeling the ground vibrate with buried stories. Some believed these mountains functioned as natural portals, guarding spiritual entrances to invisible worlds. As the sun advanced, trade routes emerged, making Axum a hub between 3 continents. Caravans crossed deserts scented with myrrh, sailors traversed the Red Sea following the stars, and merchants brought spices that perfumed entire markets. It was a living tangle where cultures intersected and symbols mingled. The landscape shaped the people, and the people shaped the destiny of the kingdom, as if everything were interconnected by an ancestral thread. In the center of this sacred territory, there were water sources that the priests considered direct blessings from heaven. Hidden wells, streams that appeared and disappeared, caves where drops echoed like rhythmic chants. There, many performed rituals to ask for protection from their ancestors or to give thanks for the harvests. The environment became a living temple where nature and spirituality walked hand in hand, and those who entered these areas felt their bodies light, as if seeing the world from another perspective. And so, amidst guardian mountains, resonant deserts, and sacred waters, Axum grew as a kingdom chosen by forces not everyone understood. Everything in that territory seemed to point to something greater, as if the geography itself announced that a great secret was about to be revealed. And while the wind swept along ancient routes, another mystery approached, calling for the spiritual origin of those who would dominate this ancestral land. They said that long before the obelisks touched the sky, Axum was born as a whisper among scattered villages, guided by omens that only the elders could interpret. Time seemed to run differently there, as if the land breathed memories of previous civilizations. And when the first leaders emerged, the people noticed that something enveloped them, an invisible presence, a force that shaped their steps. Thus began to take shape a kingdom that did not yet know that one day it would be feared, revered, and hidden from the world. Stories tell of mysterious signs appearing in the skies, like stars that didn't belong on that celestial map. Shepherds reported luminous figures crossing the night, and priests observed shadows moving silently among the trees. For many, these were messages from ancient spirits, indicating that Axum should prepare for a grand destiny. And while this suspense gripped the people, the elders affirmed that each phenomenon was part of a prophecy written before human memory itself. From these signs, communities began to unite. Tribes that were once distant drew closer, attracted by similar dreams, where a powerful kingdom arose among sacred hills. It was as if everyone was guided by the same beat, a spiritual drum that echoed from within the earth. This union did not happen by force. It seemed natural, inevitable, as if an ancestral script were simply being fulfilled. And so, Axum ceased to be a fragment and became a body. With growth, rituals emerged that celebrated the spiritual birth of the kingdom. Priests lit bonfires that sent sparks high into the air, believing that each spark was a request carried to the ancestors. Children received blessings with perfumed oils, warriors danced to the sound of deep drums, and women chanted songs that echoed across entire valleys. Everything reverberated as if it were part of an ancient dance between the visible and the invisible, where each gesture strengthened the identity of the people. And so, Axum emerged, not merely as a territory, but as a force destined to influence worlds. Each stone laid, each ritual celebrated, each mystery observed in the stars built the foundation of something greater. And as the kingdom grew in power and purpose, another revelation approached, involving the lineage that would guide Axum through paths of light and darkness alike. They said that, on the first nights of the full moon, a story circulated among lit bonfires and reverent murmurs. Axum was not ruled only by mortal kings, but by a sacred lineage that carried the blood of 2 worlds. They said that the kingdom's destiny was sealed when Queen Makeda, known in legends as the Queen of Sheba, crossed deserts and mountains to find King Solomon. And since then, an invisible thread has linked African ancestry to the mysteries kept in Jerusalem, as if 2 traditions had walked together since the beginning of time. The elders recounted that the encounter between Makeda and Solomon was not merely political, it was spiritual. They related that, upon entering the wise king's palace, she felt the air vibrate, as if each stone of that building carried centuries of wisdom. He, in turn, is said to have seen in her a brilliance that few could bear. And so, in that silent exchange of glances, hidden prophecies began to awaken. It was as if the destiny of two peoples took shape before the world, a destiny that no scribe would dare to fully record. From this union was born Menelik, the prince whose name meant continuity. From childhood, it is said that he was guided by mysterious signs, dreams of distant temples, voices echoing in the wind, omens appearing in the shadows of the mountains. Many believed that he carried the spirit of both kingdoms, African strength and ancient wisdom. And as he grew, it became clearer that his destiny was not ordinary, it was sacred. When Menelik first visited Jerusalem, it is said that the temple seemed to recognize him. The priests watched him in surprise, for he moved as if walking through familiar ground. And it was during this visit that one of the greatest secrets of antiquity is said to have begun: the direct connection between Axum and the most sacred symbol in ancient history. Some accounts spoke of visions, others of omens, but all agreed that something powerful happened during that encounter, something that would change the course of the spiritual world. And upon returning to Axum, the young prince brought with him not only the experience of a distant kingdom, but a forbidden truth that would become the core of Axumite identity. It was as if an invisible bridge had been erected between two worlds, preparing the people for a legacy yet to be revealed. And while the kingdom celebrated the heir's return, a new mystery approached, shrouded in light and secrecy, ready to transform Axum into the guardian of something many would never dare touch. Some say that, in the dead of night, a golden light escaped through ancient cracks in the chapel in Axum, as if something alive pulsed within. It was a timid but intense glow, leaving in the air a scent of sacred wood and perfumed oil. The inhabitants walked respectfully nearby, for they knew that this place held much more than simple relics. It held an object that transcended eras and beliefs, an artifact capable of uniting distant worlds. And so the whisper that echoed throughout the kingdom was born: the Ark of the Covenant had found rest in Axum. According to ancient accounts, the Ark did not arrive in the kingdom as an ordinary treasure. Some said it came guided by dreams sent to young Menelik, others claimed to have seen signs in the heavens, like sparks falling silently on the mountains. The truth, however, always remained hidden, shrouded in mystery and reverence. And the more people tried to understand what had happened, the more they realized that this event surpassed any known logic. It was as if invisible forces had directed the sacred to the heart of Africa. When the Ark was placed in Axum, ritualists and priests performed ceremonies that lasted all night. Drums echoed like the beating of an ancestral heart, incense burned slowly, and sacred words filled the air with such a profound vibration that some fell to their knees. Those who participated in the vigils claimed they felt the presence of something powerful, something that seemed to observe their every movement, as if awakening from a long silence. And that feeling would never leave them. In time, a guardian was chosen, a man who would dedicate his entire life to caring for the Arkansas. He lived in seclusion, protected by walls and rituals, and could never leave the small chapel where the sacred rested. Some said his voice was as calm as the night wind. Others claimed his eyes carried their own light, like burning embers. Few saw him, but all knew his presence was necessary, for no one could bear the spiritual weight of approaching the Ark without proper preparation. And so, Axum became the center of a secret that would span centuries, guarding an object whose existence always troubled those who preferred to keep history fragmented. Because, in protecting the Ark, the kingdom assumed a role that many would try to erase. And while the guardian remained silent before the sacred, a new mystery approached, revealing that the true power of Axum was only beginning to awaken. When the first stories about the faith of Axum traveled beyond the mountains, many were surprised to discover that this distant kingdom already venerated Christ before much of Europe even knew how to pronounce his name. In the center of the squares, monks draped in white robes walked at dawn, chanting hymns that rose like ritual smoke toward the sky. The air vibrated with spirituality, as if the very ground had been consecrated by invisible hands. And thus emerged a fact that many dared not admit. Axum had embraced the new faith long before the kingdoms that would later dominate the Christian narrative. It was said that King Ezana's conversion was not merely political, it was a profound calling. He is said to have seen unusual signs in the heavens, stars that moved slowly, like messengers. Shepherds reported luminous apparitions on the riverbanks, and ancient priests felt a different atmosphere, as if a presence awaited to manifest itself. And when Ezana embraced the Christian faith, he did not do so through imposition, but with a reverence that transformed the kingdom naturally, as if he were reclaiming something that already belonged to him. The ceremonies of that period were vibrant and full of symbolism. Monks struck their staffs on the ground, marking the rhythm of prayers, while women crowned the temples with flowers and perfumed oils. Water was collected in special gourds and blessed in rituals that celebrated spiritual rebirth. The sound of bells echoed through the valleys, mingling with bird song and the rustling of leaves. For the people, every gesture was laden with meaning, a direct dialogue with the sacred. But this devotion did not please everyone. Neighboring peoples, threatened by the spiritual and political growth of Axum, tried to question its faith. Others, from more distant lands, preferred to erase the achievements of the Axumites to ensure that their own kingdoms were seen as the exclusive cradles of Christianity. Thus, Axum slowly faded into the shadows of official narratives, as if its light were too strong to be recognized without altering the entire map of history. But the people knew. The truth echoed in the architecture, in the manuscripts, in the living faith that endured. And as the kingdom progressed with the new faith intertwined with its ancestral rituals, another revelation began to pulsate beneath the sacred ground. For more than an early Christian kingdom, Axum held structures that defied the understanding of any traveler. And soon, under the sun's brilliance, the next mystery that would mark its greatness would emerge: the obelisks that seemed to converse with the stars. They said that, walking through the ancient streets of Axum, it was impossible to ignore the long shadows cast on the ground, shadows of stone giants that seemed to watch over the kingdom from ancient times. The obelisks rose like arrows pointing to the sky, each carved with such precise detail that many believed they could not have been shaped by human hands alone. There were false doors, windows that led nowhere, and symbols repeated like mantras engraved in the rock. To those who observed them for the first time, it was as if they were standing before a stone book written in an ancient language. The elders recounted that these obelisks were not simply funerary monuments, but spiritual bridges. On certain nights, when the wind blew between the columns, it was possible to hear a deep sound, almost a chant, as if the structures were communicating with each other. Some reported seeing unusual reflections on the surface of the stones at dawn, as if invisible lights circulated among them. And so the mystery was born. Why did Axum erect such monumental structures, and what exactly did they hold? Priests claimed that each obelisk marked an energetic point in the kingdom, aligned with specific constellations. They performed rituals around these stones, using incense that released aromas of myrrh and ancient resins. The ground vibrated with slow drums, and those present closed their eyes to feel the pulse of the energies. They said that some people fell into trances, seeing visions of lost cities, of ancestors walking between worlds, or of portals that opened like flames. For many, Axum was more than a kingdom. It was a spiritual map. Over the centuries, foreigners began to question the origin of the obelisks. Some believed they were tombs, others that they marked the presence of mythical kings. Some even suggested that these structures rivaled the pyramids of Egypt in grandeur and significance. And the more questions arose, the deeper the mystery became. After all, who could have so precisely designed entire buildings in a single stone? What complete history was carved there, waiting to be deciphered? Many scholars realized that if the obelisks were fully understood, the narrative of antiquity would change forever. And while these immense columns continued to defy time, the kingdom prepared to reveal another secret, something even deeper, a legacy written not in stone, but in eternal symbols. For around the obelisks, there was a language as ancient as the mountains, ready to open new paths of understanding. And the wind that touched the stones seemed to invite the traveler to continue on to the next revelation. It was said that, on the quietest nights, the monks of Axum would light small lamps around ancient manuscripts, written in a language that seemed to carry the echo of humanity's first whispers. It was Gizi, the sacred script that flowed like rivers of ink on yellowed parchment. The letters possessed curves and symbols that awakened a strange feeling in those who observed them, as if each stroke were an open door to knowledge that should never have been forgotten. And those manuscripts vibrated with stories that the centuries could not erase. As many leafed through these texts, they felt a shiver run down their spine. There were symbols that seemed to move when viewed out of the corner of the eye, lines that pulsed like discrete heartbeats. Some ancient accounts said that Gizi was not just a form of writing. It was a spiritual code, a bridge between the physical and the invisible world. The priests believed that certain passages could only be read at specific times, when the energy of the earth was aligned with the sky. And so, the mystery grew, enveloping the writing in a cloak of secrecy and reverence. During the rituals, these texts were carried like living relics. Priests walked in circles, holding the scrolls in their hands wrapped in cloths to prevent the sacred energy from escaping uncontrollably. The sound of the chants in Gizi filled the air, creating an almost unreal atmosphere. It was common for visitors to close their eyes, as the melody seemed to flow through the body like a gentle current. Each word echoed with spiritual weight, awakening sensations that could not be explained logically. Over generations, foreign scholars attempted to decipher the spirit of this writing, but found more questions than answers. Some claimed that Gizi carried influences from distant worlds. Others perceived connections with texts far older than official history allows. There were those who argued that certain symbols predated Egypt itself, like fragments of a primordial tradition that spread throughout the world before being fragmented. But Axum kept its writing alive, resilient, as a guardian of a greater memory. And while the manuscripts continued to be preserved in silence, another spiritual treasure awaited its moment to appear. For among the pages of Gizi lay a text that safeguarded one of the greatest secrets linked to the lineage of Axum and the sacred Arkansas. And so, like a call that transcends time, the revelation of the book that sustained the faith and mystery of the kingdom drew near, the Kebra Nagast. When the priests lit bonfires on nights of the waxing moon, a book was brought to the center of the circle as if it carried the very heart of the kingdom, the Kebra Nagast. Its ancient pages, written in Gizi, held the memory of a lineage that united worlds, of a history so profound that many believed only the spirit could fully comprehend it. The scent of warm parchment mingled with the aroma of burning resins, creating a dense, almost palpable atmosphere. Those who approached felt that they were not before a simple text, but a living entity, guardian of secrets that had escaped the hands of Western chroniclers. It was said that the Kebra Nagast contained revelations dating back to the time of Solomon and Makeda, narrating not only the spiritual origin of Axum, but also the hidden path of the Ark of the Covenant. There were passages that spoke of prophetic dreams, luminous apparitions, and pacts made between men and invisible forces. And some symbols were so complex that only the elders could interpret them. For the people, it was like hearing their own past calling, recalling truths that had been silenced so that other voices could dominate history. During the rituals, the book was placed on a deep red cloth, representing ancestral blood. Priests circled around the text, chanting songs that seemed to vibrate in the air like invisible strings. The words echoed through the temple, taking on a life of their own. Some participants described sudden visions, fragments of ancient cities, battles, temples illuminated by gold, and beings enveloped in light. It was as if the book opened portals to memories that no one knew where they came from, but that everyone instinctively recognized. And as time passed, foreign scholars tried to understand the power of the Kebra Nagast. Some called it a myth, others a historical document, but few realized its true value. It was a spiritual map, a map that connected Axum to distant peoples who also sought explanations for the mysteries that permeated antiquity. With each new reading, another layer of meaning emerged, as if the book were infinite, always revealing something new when someone was ready to understand. And while Kabra Nagast continued to be guarded with reverence, a shadow loomed on the horizon. For not everyone wanted Axum to keep its secrets alive. External forces were already watching the kingdom with uneasy eyes, preparing the ground for a conflict that would attempt to erase centuries of spirituality and spiritual power. And so, the next mystery began to unfold, silent but inevitable. Over time, the kingdom realized that there were too many eyes watching its traditions, like birds of prey circling a hidden treasure. The caravans that once arrived bringing spices began to bring rumors of strangers who questioned the greatness of Axum. They said that some foreign chroniclers refused to record their names, as if they feared altering the balance of the stories they told the world. And little by little, the silence imposed by these external voices began to weigh on the kingdom, like a thick fog trying to obscure its ancestral light. Ancient accounts mention travelers who, upon returning to their homelands, described Axum as legend, reducing its achievements to whispers and its traditions to exaggerations. Thus, incomplete maps, truncated books, and discourses that avoided mentioning the kingdom emerged, so as not to acknowledge the African influence on the mysteries of antiquity. It was a subtle but persistent attempt to erase Axum from the global imagination. And the more this erasure spread, the more the people felt that an invisible battle was being waged, not for land, but for memory. Within the kingdom, spiritual leaders knew that the danger came not from swords, but from narratives. An armed enemy could be defeated, but an enemy who rewrites the past could destroy centuries of identity without shedding a single drop of blood. Therefore, rituals arose dedicated not only to physical protection, but to the preservation of memory. Priests chanted to bind the past to the earth, while elders taught children stories that should never be forgotten. Resistance began within the soul. Later, when foreign incursions actually occurred, some armed, others disguised as scientific exploration, the impact was devastating. Sacred works were looted, manuscripts disappeared, and monuments were damaged or taken to distant places. The echo of this violence could be felt in the broken stones and in the eyes of the survivors. Yet, Axum resisted. Its temples remained standing, its ritualists stood firm, and the sacred never ceased to pulsate in the hearts of its people. And while external forces tried to extinguish Axum's brilliance, something unexpected happened. The more they tried to silence it, the stronger the ancestral call became, inviting the world to see what had been hidden. It was as if the kingdom itself awakened, ready to reveal secrets that transcended borders. And so the next mystery arose, connections so ancient and profound that they united Axum with lands far beyond the horizon. They said that when the winds blew from the desert towards the mountains of Axum, they carried with them murmurs from distant lands, echoes of ancient Egypt, mystical Arabia, and even the rituals of Israel. It was as if civilizations separated by seas and millennia shared the same breath, the same spiritual thread that ran through Axum as if it were the central point of a vast sacred web. And those who traveled along the trade routes noticed similar symbols, similar beliefs, stories that fit together like pieces of a puzzle forgotten by the chroniclers of the world. Legends claimed that Axumite ships crossing the Red Sea returned with tales of Egyptian temples bearing familiar symbols, such as the solar disk and the Ankh cross, which echoed in African rituals. Caravans from Arabia recounted similar traditions of priest-kings, of alliances sealed with incense and myrrh, substances that were also part of the spiritual daily life of Axum. Even Hebrew emissaries, according to some stories, recognized in Axumite chants melodies reminiscent of ancient Levantine liturgies. It was as if the cultures conversed with each other without ever having needed to meet. In the temples, the priests observed these coincidences attentively. They believed that this harmony was not the work of chance, but a remnant of primordial knowledge shared by ancient peoples before distances separated them. Therefore, they performed rituals involving fire, water, and the deep sounds of drums, seeking to access these shared memories. Some priests entered a trance, seeing visions of pyramids, caravans, and cities made of golden stone. For them, Axum was not just a kingdom, it was a spiritual node connecting worlds. Over the centuries, foreign scholars also began to notice these similarities. Some recorded that Axumite artifacts bore a striking resemblance to symbols used in pharaonic Egypt. Others identified religious practices reminiscent of Jewish traditions and ancient Arab wisdom. But many of these discoveries were suppressed, as acknowledging such connections would mean admitting that Axum was part of the heart of sacred history, and not the periphery, as so many insisted. The mystery grew, fueled by evidence that would never completely disappear. And while these forbidden connections continued to vibrate among stones, rituals, and legends, another revelation was approaching. A revelation that spoke not only of symbols or shared beliefs, but of a living people, guardians of traditions that had spanned millennia. Soon, the enigmatic presence of a community that kept alive an ancestral spiritual heritage, deeply connected to this invisible fabric between cultures, would emerge. In the silent valleys of Ethiopia, where dawn paints the mountains with shades of aged gold, lived a people who carried a spiritual heritage too ancient to be measured. They were known as Beta Israel, guardians of traditions that seemed to have been breathed directly from the time of Moses into the heart of Africa. Their simple homes concealed profound rituals, and their chants echoed like living memories of a past many believed lost. Those who observed them sensed that there was something different there, something that escaped the books and resisted time like a flame protected in the hands. They said their faith followed paths parallel to the stories of the ancient Hebrews. They observed the Sabbath with absolute respect, lit sacred fires, and recited verses reminiscent of forgotten passages from the Old Testament. Some travelers reported seeing elders with scrolls written in Gizi, containing prayers that seemed extremely ancient. It was as if these people carried not only traditions, but fragments of a time when Axum, Israel, and Sheba still conversed as brother peoples. It was a silent but powerful connection. Among their rituals, the most intriguing was the Sigd, a festival held high in the mountains, where the faithful ascended in procession chanting songs that echoed through the valleys. From up there, they bowed towards ancient Jerusalem, as if the past were on the horizon. The fresh air carried the sound of devotion, and some participants entered deep states of contemplation, seeing visions of holy cities, pillars of light, and figures shrouded in white robes. For many, the Sigd was an invisible bridge between distant worlds. Foreigners who witnessed these rituals were perplexed by the remarkable preservation of such ancient practices. Some scholars attempted to explain the phenomenon through ancient migrations. Others claimed that the Beta Israel were direct descendants of priests who accompanied the Ark when it left Jerusalem. Nothing, however, fully explained the spiritual force emanating from that people. Their traditions survived invasions, persecutions, and centuries of isolation, as if protected by something greater than human protection. And while these guardians kept their ancestral flame alive, the Kingdom of Axum continued to reveal secrets buried beneath stones, sand, and silence. Because it wasn't just people who guarded memories, the very soil concealed stories awaiting archaeological hands to awaken them. And so, a new enigma approached, made of ruins, inscriptions, and evidence that could never be ignored. When archaeologists began to excavate the soil of Axum, they realized that each layer revealed more questions than answers. The first shovels lifted fragments of pottery with unusual designs, but as they descended, pieces of gold, inscriptions in Gizi, and structures suggesting immense palaces hidden beneath centuries of dust emerged. The air seemed to change within the excavations, as if the past were breathing again. Some claimed to feel a slight warmth emanating from the earth, as if something sacred had been disturbed. And so began a revelation that no Western book had foreseen. Then ancient coins appeared, gleaming even after being buried for so long. On them, profoundly spiritual symbols, the star associated with Solomon, primitive crosses, and figures of kings who seemed to carry divine authority. These objects were not mere artifacts. They were silent testimonies of a history connected to the peoples of the Bible, Egypt, and ancient trade routes. Holding them between their fingers, researchers reported a strange feeling of familiarity, as if they were touching something they already knew, even without explanation. In deeper excavations, fallen columns, marble floors, and tombs containing mysterious inscriptions were uncovered. Some texts narrated the deeds of forgotten kings, others mentioned rituals involving the Ark of the Covenant. Many sections were damaged, as if they had been deliberately destroyed. The presence of this destruction raised suspicions among scholars. Why would someone have tried to erase such important records? And why did so many of these remains seem to align with biblical passages left aside for centuries? Meanwhile, caves near the archaeological sites revealed paintings and reliefs with enigmatic images, beings in long robes, obelisks radiating lines of energy, boats crossing seas under signs carved in the sky. Some figures even resembled distant temples, as if Axum had been part of a global spiritual network. Researchers silently recorded these images, realizing that their existence threatened simplistic versions of ancient history. It was impossible to deny Axum knew more about the sacred than many wanted to admit. And as these findings took shape, a feeling grew among those studying the kingdom. A clear sense that something greater lay hidden beneath the earth, something that linked Axum to the spiritual destiny of entire peoples. Because each ruin seemed to point to an even deeper enigma, something that united kings, symbols, and traditions in a single lineage of mystery. And so, the next secret drew closer, illuminated by the past, but designed to echo in the present. They said that, in the heart of the chapel where the ark rested, lived a man whose life was entirely dedicated to the sacred, the guardian. He was chosen from among a select few, trained from a young age to bear a burden that no other would dare to carry. Those who saw him, even from afar, described his presence as something out of the ordinary. There was a silence around him, a dense silence, as if the world bowed when he passed. His gaze seemed to see beyond time, and his breath was so soft that many believed he lived between this world and another. The guardian was rarely seen walking in the outside areas. Most of his life was spent inside the small chapel, where light timidly filtered through the cracks in the old windows. It was said that, at dusk, he would kneel before the ark and remain motionless for hours, as if listening to voices that no one else could hear. Some monks reported that, on certain nights, a golden glow would appear behind the door, as if the sacred object were calling to him. And the guardian would respond with soft chants that echoed through the temple in melodies almost impossible to reproduce. Over the years, stories about his abilities began to circulate. Some claimed he could discern intentions simply by observing someone's walk. Others said his presence could calm spiritual storms, or that he knew when a visitor was lying before they even opened their mouth. Despite these legends, the guardian never claimed any power. For him, everything was service. Service to the sacred, service to the lineage of Solomon, service to the people who trusted in the invisible protection of the ark. However, his life was not made only of devotion, it was also of sacrifice. He could not leave the chapel, he could not see the world beyond the stone walls, he could not have a family or rest. His existence was entirely dedicated to protecting what many considered the most powerful object ever described by humanity. And yet he showed no regret. In the eyes of the people, the guardian was the last link between the material and spiritual worlds, the only one capable of keeping the ark's presence balanced, without its power overflowing and causing damage.
And while this silent man dedicated his life to the mystery, something was stirring beyond the kingdom's borders. The history of Axum was about to cross paths with the outside world once more, revealing traditions that had survived intact despite centuries of isolation. And so, the next mystery approached, bringing with it ancestral liturgies that still echoed across the African continent. In the silent dawns, when the wind descended from the mountains like an ancient lament, it was possible to hear the chants echoing through the temples of Axum. They were profound melodies, sung in a language that seemed to have been shaped even before history took form. These rituals were the cornerstone of original African Christianity, a faith that imitated nothing, copied nothing, but was born from the fusion between the ancestral spirit and the sacred message that had arrived long before the Western world would admit. And those who witnessed these ceremonies felt they were entering a territory where the divine walked side by side with the living. The monks gathered before sunrise, dressed in white robes that resembled wings illuminated by the twilight. They struck their staffs on the ground in a slow rhythm, creating sounds that seemed to awaken the earth. With each strike, the temple vibrated subtly, as if recognizing the presence of those who prayed there. These rituals were unlike any liturgy known in the West. They mixed ancient chants, intense incense, circular movements, and prayers recited as intimate conversations with the sacred. It was a living, breathing, profound spirituality. In the temple corridors, elders taught the young that this form of faith was a continuation, not a beginning. They said that Axum had received spiritual light long before distant empires even dreamed of adopting Christianity. For them, the apostles and travelers who crossed the Red Sea did not bring a new belief. They merely rekindled a flame that already burned in the heart of the continent. And so, each liturgical gesture seemed to carry memories of ancient times, like echoes of an ancestral pact that was never broken. Foreigners visiting Axum were amazed to see how that faith remained intact, almost untouched by centuries of transformation. The churches carved into the rock, the crosses sculpted with unique patterns, and the illuminated manuscripts revealed a spirituality that grew independent, strong, and authentic. Some scholars tried to record this phenomenon, but realized that written words could never translate what one felt when witnessing those rituals. It was like trying to capture the wind in a jar. Impossible, because the true power lay in what could not be seen. And while the liturgies echoed throughout the kingdom, something else began to stir beyond the mountains. For, despite the spiritual strength that Axum had preserved, external forces still insisted on obscuring its history and diminishing its heritage. And so, the next mystery arose, a shadow from distant lands, poised to try and silence that which time had never been able to erase. As the centuries progressed, travelers emerged, crossing oceans and deserts, carrying with them a curiosity disguised as admiration. But behind the praise lay a growing unease each time they heard of the Ark, the obelisks, and the ancestral faith that had shaped Axum. In some distant regions, leaders feared the symbolic power of this African kingdom. They feared what it would mean to admit its influence on sacred history. And so, slowly and silently, a process of narrative erosion began. Maps omitting its name, books downplaying its importance, speeches completely ignoring its existence. The first attempts at erasure were subtle, almost imperceptible. Foreign chroniclers claimed not to understand the local rituals, writing accounts that diminished their spiritual depth. Others described Axum as an exotic but small kingdom. It was a calculated choice, as if each word had the function of erasing layers of grandeur. Even so, the people of the kingdom remained steadfast, guarding their customs like one protects fire in the midst of a storm. They knew that memory is harder to destroy than monuments. As generations passed, the erasure intensified. European explorers began collecting artifacts, taking them to distant lands under the pretext of study or preservation. Manuscripts disappeared, obelisks were toppled, and even temples were violated. Each loss was felt as a deep cut in the soul of the people, but still, Axum stood strong. There was always someone willing to rebuild, retell, rekindle. The spiritual heritage was stubborn. It refused to die. To protect their history, the elders began to transmit ancient narratives orally, ensuring that nothing was lost even without writing. Children sat around campfires listening to stories about kings, prophets, and ancient pacts. These narratives became invisible walls, as important as the monuments themselves. Each spoken word kept the kingdom's identity alive, as if the past were stitched into the present through the human voice. And the people realized that, although foreigners could carry away ruins, they could never carry away memory. And while these external shadows attempted to obscure Axum, a new movement began to emerge both within and beyond the continent. People in different parts of the world began to seek answers, to question absence, to search for what had been erased. It was as if truth itself was calling for recognition. And in this collective awakening, the next mystery emerged, a silent rebirth that would begin to illuminate the Axumite spiritual heritage as never before. It was said that, in the middle of the last century, something unexpected began to happen. People from distant lands, with no apparent connection to Axum, began to feel a profound calling coming from Africa. Young people from the diaspora, restless scholars, and travelers driven by strange intuitions began to seek answers that Western books never offered. It was as if a dormant memory had awakened, guiding thousands of eyes to the forgotten kingdom that official narratives insisted on silencing. A rebirth was beginning, gentle but inevitable. At the heart of this awakening was Ethiopia itself, which saw its children scattered throughout the world beginning to revisit ancient traditions. Spiritual movements, such as Rastafarianism, turned to Axum as a beacon, proclaiming that there lay the African root of sacred royalty. Rastafarians made pilgrimages to Ethiopia seeking not only inspiration, but reconnection with a past that had been stolen from them by the force of history. For them, Axum was not just a place. It was a promise, an origin, a portal to understanding themselves. At the same time, African archaeologists began a new phase of studies, this time conducted with respect and historical awareness. They realized that Axum needed to be told by Africa itself, not through the distorted lenses of foreigners. Excavations gained new life, and ancient oral narratives began to be recorded. Wise women, elders, and spiritual leaders were invited to share memories passed down through generations. The past began to breathe again through the voices that should always have preserved it. In the diaspora, universities, artists, and thinkers began to boldly revisit African history. Documentaries emerged, books were published, and many young people rediscovered their ancestral pride upon learning that Axum had been a spiritual and geopolitical powerhouse 2,000 years ago. What was once silenced was now celebrated. It was as if each person in the diaspora found a piece of themselves in the ancient columns, the obelisks, the Gizi chants, the illuminated manuscripts. The Renaissance took shape, gained color, gained strength. And as this movement grew, Axum seemed to awaken along with it. Temples were restored, ancestral festivals gained new voices, and the people began to feel that history was finally being reclaimed. But there was still more to be revealed, for among rituals, prophecies, and legends, there was an ancient promise written in the Kebra Nagast, a prophecy that spoke of the return of the scattered peoples and a time when the forbidden truth would return to light. And it was precisely this mystery that was beginning to emerge on the horizon. They said that, among the aged pages of the Kebra Nagast, there were passages that few dared to read aloud. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. These were words that spoke of a future time, a time when the scattered children of the continent would once again recognize their connection to the sacred. These mysterious lines mentioned a spiritual return, as if history itself were bound to a cycle that would one day inevitably be completed. And those who listened to these readings felt a slight shiver, as if something ancient were stirring again after a long silence. Some elders said the prophecy was clear. When the world began to rediscover Axum, a symbolic portal would be reopened. Not a physical portal, but an inner calling. Many believed that this calling had already begun, manifesting itself in the awakening of the diaspora and the growing search for identity. For them, this reclaiming was no coincidence. It was the fulfillment of something written long before the modern kingdoms existed. And as they spoke, their eyes shone with the certainty of those who feel history breathing. During certain rituals, priests recited passages from the book in melodic chants, and these words seemed to alter the very air. Some present reported having fleeting visions, images of peoples walking towards the same point, different flags united by the same spiritual breath, ancient cities awakening under the golden light of dawn. Nothing was explicitly stated in the manuscripts, but the feeling was clear. Axum still had a role to play in the great spiritual fabric of humanity. Scholars who delved into these prophecies began to notice surprising connections between them and traditions from other cultures. There were parallels with Hebrew texts, echoes of Arab legends, and even resonances with mythologies of the Nile and the mountains of Sudan. It was as if all these traditions pointed in the same direction, to the same revelation that had remained dormant for centuries. And the more they compared the narratives, the clearer it became that Axum was a crucial point in this global prophecy. And as these revelations gained momentum, one last mystery emerged, ready to connect everything that had been told so far. The impact of Axum in the present day, the echo that its history still produces in politics, spirituality, African identity, and the imagination of the diaspora. Because the past was not just the past, it was a flame that still illuminated the present. When the sun touched the obelisks of Axum at dawn, it was possible to feel that those ancient stones still conversed with the present. It was as if each mark carved centuries ago emitted a silent reminder: the kingdom never ceased to influence the world. The spirituality that was born there continued to live in the churches carved into the rock, in the chants in Gizi, and in the way millions of people, inside and outside Africa, sought their roots in what had been hidden. Axum was not a ruin, it was a beacon. And those who approached this truth felt their hearts vibrate. In modern political debates, references to the kingdom emerged like burning flames in discourses about sovereignty, identity, and historical recovery. Young people in the diaspora carried Axumite symbols in necklaces, tattoos, and works of art as a way of reclaiming a legacy denied for centuries. Even globalized cultural movements began to recognize the kingdom's importance in the spiritual and cultural formation of the African continent. And the more people discovered this hidden past, the more the silence imposed by colonial history vanished like dust in the wind. In contemporary rituals, monks still ring bells and chant songs that predate all European forms of Christianity. Their voices echo between valleys and temples, reminding the world that Africa not only received the faith, it helped shape it. And in communities scattered across the planet, people who have never set foot in Ethiopia say they feel an inexplicable connection to Axum, as if ancestry were calling their name through generations. The invisible became a bridge between continents. Modern scholars now treat the kingdom with the respect it has always deserved. Research reveals archaeological, linguistic, and spiritual connections that were previously ignored. Documentaries, books, and conferences are beginning to illuminate what remained in the shadows for so long. But more than that, the African population itself has led the rescue movement, telling its story in its own voice. Axum, finally, was returning to the center of the cultural map, not through external recognition, but through its own memory. And as the world rediscovers Axum, it becomes clear that its history doesn't end in ruins or ancient manuscripts. It extends to us, shaping consciences, inspiring inner revolutions, and reminding us that African spirituality has always played a profound role in shaping the world. And so, the next step in this journey remains open, like an ancient road illuminated by stars, inviting the listener to continue towards the next mystery. As night falls, when shadows lengthen over the ancient stones of Axum, the feeling is that time folds back on itself. The past is not behind us, it is beside us, walking with those who dare to listen. And each obelisk, each chant, each page of the Kebre Nagast seems to whisper the same message: Africa has never ceased to be the spiritual heart of humanity. The stories that crossed deserts, seas, and persecutions reveal a legacy that no erasure could destroy. There, where kings conversed with prophets and where the sacred rests protected for centuries, we find more than history, we find identity. We find the ancestral brilliance that still pulsates in descendants scattered throughout the world, summoning each one to remember who they truly are. And as we watch Axum reappear in the global imagination, we realize that its mission was never finished. There are still buried secrets, hidden manuscripts, memories waiting for the courage of those who wish to relive them. The kingdom remains like an eternal flame, illuminating the questions our ancestors left in the air. Where did we come from? What connects us? And what part of our history still sleeps beneath the sands of time? May this journey awaken respect, curiosity, and reverence for the forgotten past. May each person who heard this account carry with them a fragment of that ancestral light. And may Axum, with its spiritual grandeur, continue to guide those who seek answers in the silence between worlds. Before we close this sacred circle, leave your mark on this living story. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for future revelations. Many mysteries still await your presence.